Hey guys, tonight we're heading back in time to medieval Poland, specifically to a chilly dawn in Krakow's Market Square. Picture it, the rising sun throws soft gold across crooked rooftops, merchants shout sleepily over their carts of turnips and eels, and the smell, equal parts horse hay, yeast and something, that smells suspiciously like a smouldering cabbage stew from last night's dinner. You trudge along cobblestones slick with frost clutching your aching jaw because you forgot just how cold Krakow mornings could get. You're not here for sightseeing, you're here for bread. But not just any bread. Because if your nose is working and assuming you haven't frozen it off already, it'll lead you down a narrow side street where steam curls from a cellar window and the smell changes. It becomes rich, deep, doughy, the kind of scent that wakes your stomach before your brain. It's the smell of freshly baked bagels, or as they're called here in the 14th century, obwazenek. You may think you know bagels, but what's waiting underground in this stone oven chamber isn't your grocery store kind. These are chewy golden rings, boiled first then baked over smouldering firewood. They've been brushed with brine dusted with salt, or poppy seeds, and possibly blessed cursed, or both depending on which grandmother you ask. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how many corners of the world we're drifting off in. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck under a low lintel and into the warm darkness of a medieval Krakow bakery. It's still early, but the bakers are already on their third batch. You can see them in the glow of the oven, faces red with heat arms, dusted with flower hair, tucked beneath linen caps. Someone hums a folk tune as they twist long ropes of dough into circles, then drop them into a cauldron of boiling water. The steam rises in great hissing clouds. This is the start of a typical day in a not-so-typical world. Krakow, capital of the Kingdom of Poland in the Middle Ages, is bustling. Its market square is one of the largest in Europe, a sprawling stone stage where royalty parades merchants, bicker and apprentices sneak pastries when their masters aren't looking. It's the 1390s, give or take, and your boots are likely made from something stiff-patched and mildly damp. You're surrounded by cloth vendors, scribes' horse carts and yes, bakers. And among those bakers, a curious thing has happened. A guild, yes, a whole legal chartered, document-stamped guild has formed around a specific type of bread, the bagel. Or more specifically, the obwazenek, the boiled ring bread that becomes the sleepy star of our story tonight. You watch as one of the bakers leans over a wooden peel, slides a dozen golden rings into the oven, and sighs like a man who's been up since moonrise. That's because he has. Bread waits for no man, not even one with sore arms and flour in his beard. Bagels aren't the only bread in Krakow, of course. There are crusty, flat loaves, braided challah, heavy rye rounds, and pretzels shaped like figure eights. But the bagel has something special, something circular, something symbolic. You step back out into the square and look around. Everything here moves in cycles, seasons, harvests, prayers. Even the laws of bread operate in circles, literal and figurative. Bagels are shaped like eternity, and when you start to notice that, it's hard to stop. Back inside the bakery, a boy no older than 10 turns the water ladle toward the next batch. He's wearing a smock far too big for him, and his sleeves keep getting dunked in the flour. He looks up at you and grins, revealing a missing front tooth. "You want to try shaping one?" he asks, offering you a coil of dough. You hesitate, but hey, it's just dough. You twist pinch loop. The result is more squashed pretzel than elegant ring, but he nods approvingly anyway. "You'd make a fine apprentice," he says. "Probably not. You sleep too much." As you brush the flour off your hands, you wonder why this humble food deserved its own guild. What made it so important? Why did Polish kings care? And what is it about this chewy little ring of bread that lasted centuries, travelled continents, and still ends up in toasters today? Well, that's what we're here to find out. And spoiler alert, it's going to involve secret recipes, boiling rituals, royal privileges, and one very proud potter who broke a tooth and never let anyone forget it. You stay by the oven a bit longer, watching another tray of bagels go in, and wondering how something so ordinary got so complicated. Bread is bread, right not in medieval Poland. Here, bread is a form of identity, its status, its economy, and in some very literal cases, its law. Let's back up a little. In the Middle Ages, bread isn't just food. It's your daily ration, your pay, your religion, your politics. Entire systems are built around the baking and distributing of bread. If you're a peasant, you eat the coarse stuff, dense, dark, full of bran. If you're a noble, you get the good loaves, fine white sifted flour, maybe even a splash of milk, or a sprinkle of poppy seeds, if the kitchen's feeling fancy. But whether you're rich or poor, bread is unavoidable. It's the thing you eat at every meal. It holds your cheese, it sops your soup, it gets dipped into stews and gnawed on during sermons. And when you're sick, someone brings you soft torn pieces soaked in broth. Now that's true across Europe, but Poland takes it a step further. You see, bread in Poland isn't just sustenance, it's sacred. In some folk traditions, you don't cut bread, you break it. You kiss it if it falls on the ground. You never ever throw it away. That's not just superstition, that's reverence. In this world, bread is tied to blessings, to harvests, to family luck. The shape of the loaf might change depending on the festival. Round for fertility, braided for celebration, flat for mourning. And here comes the bagel, or rather, its ancestral cousin, the obwazenek, a boiled and baked ring of dough that lands somewhere between religious offering, market snack, and artisan badge of honour. So you walk through the Krakow marketplace, with fresh eyes scanning the vendor stalls and noticing all the shapes. There's flatbread baked right on stones, twists of dough dried hard like crackers. A woman walks past with a string of little bread rings looped around her wrist like edible jewellery. You start to wonder, where did this obsession come from? Historians still argue whether Poland's love of bread began with agricultural overabundance or spiritual symbolism. Was it just that wheat and barley grew well in this chilly, damp climate? Or was there something older, deeper, maybe even pre-Christian, that made the Slavic people see grain as sacred? Either way, by the 13th and 14th centuries, bread was everywhere, and it needed rules. Lots of rules. Because if you let just anyone bake whatever they wanted, chaos followed. Prices fluctuated, quality plummeted, and worst of all, unlicensed loaves started turning up at market stalls, threatening both health and harmony. So cities like Krakow started creating guilds, exclusive clubs for bakers, scribes, blacksmiths, cobblers, each with its own standards, secrets and sometimes oaths, sworn on religious relics and sacred tools. And eventually bagels, yes, bagels got one too. You pass a group of bakers hauling baskets of steaming rings to the church steps. It's Friday, which means Sabbath is coming. The bagels are headed to the Kazimierz district, the Jewish quarter, just across the Vistula River. There the ring shape takes on an added layer of meaning. It represents wholeness, the cycle of the week, the infinite nature of God's blessings. Plus, boiled dough holds up better in travel and storage than the crusty flat loaves. Still, it's not just about religion. These bakers are professionals, trained, tested, licensed. One of them sees you staring and nods. You want to know how we make them chewy, he asks, tapping the side of his nose. You have to boil it just right. Not too long, not too short, like life. You try to smile, but your face is still cold. He shrugs. Also, it helps if you pray over the dough. That part might be a joke, or not. You follow the bakers to a stone building near the church. Inside is a posted list of prices for each type of bread. The bagels are listed separately, with strict instructions on size, weight and price. That's guild law. You can't just decide to make your own and sell it under the radar, not unless you want a fine or worse, a visit from the baker's enforcer. Yes, that was a real thing. A person in charge of inspecting ovens, weighing loaves, and doling out punishments for anyone who dared cut corners. One time someone tried to sell underweight bagels at a festival. They were caught, fined, and had to walk the square, holding a sign that read, "I cheat the hungry." That's medieval Yelp for you. And it's not just quality control. Guilds protected trade secrets. The boiling time, the ratio of flour to water, which wood to use for baking, even the right knot for twisting the dough, because apparently not all loops are created equal. You're beginning to realise something. This little bread ring has layers, and not just of dough, it's wrapped in culture, law, pride, and yes, a whole lot of effort. You try to imagine a world where bagels are not casual breakfast fare, but a carefully guarded tradition, where your ability to make the perfect crust could determine your income, your reputation, even your family's future. You glance down at your hands, still cold, still slightly floury from your earlier attempt, and still not remotely ready to join the guild. You start to think about the shape again. The circle. It's everywhere in Krakow. The city itself is built in rings. The old town at the centre surrounded by defensive walls, trade routes, then farmland in widening loops. The markets rotate weekly. The seasons are marked by festivals on repeat, and the church bells toll in a kind of endless echoing loop. And now you realise, so do the bagels. That loop isn't just practical, it's symbolic. In medieval Poland, and especially among the Jewish communities of Kazimierz, round foods carry layered meanings. The circle has no beginning, no end. It represents continuity, protection, and completion. Eating round bread isn't just about nutrition, it's about spiritual wholeness. It's like biting into a prayer. You walk past a shrine tucked into the side of a building. Someone has left an obwarzenek there, looped neatly on a nail driven into the stone. Below it is a votive candle, barely flickering in the wind. You're not sure if it's a superstition or a silent offering, but somehow it fits. Historians still debate how much of this symbolism was intentional and how much was assigned after the fact. Did medieval bakers really shape their loaves with cosmic significance in mind, or did the bagel simply evolve into its ring shape for practical reasons? Easy to carry, easy to string, fast to bake. The answer most likely is a little of both, which is how so many historical traditions survive. Partly useful, partly meaningful, partly we've always done it this way. You duck into a side street where a woman is twisting dough into long cords. She isn't part of a guild, just a home baker preparing for the weekend. But even she is shaping her loaves into rings. She lays them on a wooden board beside a window ledge to rise. Her daughter watches eyes wide, then tries to copy the motion. Her little loop flops unevenly onto the board, and both of them laugh. There's something oddly comforting about it. The way these rings keep reappearing, the way hands shape them the same way over and over again. You stop by a stall where a young man is selling bagels, already boiled and baked. They hang from rods like golden wreaths, each one still steaming faintly in the cold air. He plucks one down and offers it to you. Try it, he says, fresh. You bite in. Chewy, slightly crisp on the outside. There's salt on your lips and flour on your fingers. He grins. You look like someone thinking too hard about bread. You are. Because now you're wondering when that shape started to mean something. Was it long before the guilds? Maybe even before Poland became a kingdom? Could it trace back to ancient rites, harvest circles, sun symbols, or seasonal wreaths? Some scholars connect ring bread to ancient Roman culinary customs. Others say it came through Eastern Europe, with Jewish communities fleeing persecution further west. There are even whispered theories that early Slavic tribes made circular bread to honour the sun long before Christianity took root. Whatever the origin, the shape stuck, and it didn't just stick, it spread. You begin to notice something else about the ring. It's a symbol of inclusion. Guilds are about that too, about drawing a circle around a craft and saying, only those inside the ring may practice it. That sounds exclusive, and it is, but it's also protective. Guilds offered security, community. They looked after their own. For Jewish bakers, this was especially important. Their communities were often restricted in what professions they could pursue. Bread, particularly boiled bread, became both a trade and a form of identity. The bagel wasn't just food, it was proof of skill, resilience, and belonging. You watch as a guild apprentice walks past carrying a sealed basket. On the lid is a wax emblem, a sign that the bread inside has been inspected, approved and priced according to guild law. It's a bit dramatic, but in a time when people could be fined or worse for undercutting the rules, symbols mattered. You follow him to the church steps where another baker meets him. They exchange words in hushed tones, then hand over the goods. No coin is exchanged, not yet. Instead there's a ledger, a nod, an agreement. It's all very formal for bread, but in this world, bread is everything. A group of children chase each other around the square, one wearing a loop of mini bagels like a necklace. They squeal with laughter as a dog joins in the chase, clearly hoping one will fall off. You smile and take another bite. It's slightly sweeter now that it's warm. You wonder what it would be like to spend your life making these rolling dough, boiling, baking, repeating the same pattern for decades. Would it be tedious or peaceful? There's something meditative about it. Repetition that creates rhythm. A pattern so reliable it starts to feel like poetry or prayer. One of the older bakers once said that dough listens to your hands, that if you're angry, the bread turns tough. If you're patient, it stays soft. Maybe it's a myth, maybe not. Either way, you're beginning to believe that bread remembers. The city clock tolls from the church tower. Somewhere another oven door slams shut. And inside yet another loop of dough begins its slow sacred transformation. As the morning warms and the frost on the market stones begins to thaw, you find yourself crossing the bridge to Kazimierz Krakow's bustling Jewish district. The Vistula glints like dull silver beneath you, and a chill wind cuts through your cloak, but the smell, oh, the smell draws you forward. This is where the bagel truly lives, not just as food, but as tradition, as ritual, as identity. Kazimierz is alive with the sounds of sweeping hammering, muttered blessings, and dough slapping onto floured boards. Chickens dart between feet, children sing rhymes in Yiddish, and old men argue about prices, prophecies, and pickles. You pass a scribe hunched over parchment, a grocer with onions hanging like braids from his stall, and finally the baker's shop you've been seeking. A round, soot-streaked oven anchors the space. The baker, Rivka, is elbow-deep in dough, her sleeves rolled up past her elbows, her wimple damp with steam. She's not smiling exactly, but her eyes gleam when she sees you staring. "You've come for bagels," she says. Not a question. You nod. She motions for you to come closer and points at the bubbling copper cauldron beside the oven. It looks more like a cauldron from a fairy tale, except what's floating in it isn't potion, it's dough. Rings of it puffing up and dancing as the water churns. This, she says, is what makes it holy. You raise an eyebrow. Boiling first, she explains. Always. Without that, it's just bread with a hole. But boiled, then baked. She holds up a ring just pulled from the pot steam, rising like incense. That's a bagel. You watch as she lays it on a wooden peel and slides it into the oven. There's a hiss as water meets fire. The smell is divine. Toasted flour, crackling heat, and something sweet beneath it all. Not sugar, something deeper, ritual. Historians still argue whether this method came from Eastern Europe, the Middle East, or some merging of both. Was it invented here in Poland, or was it brought by Jewish migrants fleeing persecution in Germany and France? Some believe it dates back to boiled bread, served to royalty as a soft alternative for older teeth. Others think it's a modified version of pretzels or German-style rolls. What's clear is that the technique mattered. Boiling gelatinizes the starch on the surface of the dough, forming a barrier that keeps the interior dense and chewy. It's what gives the bagel its signature bite. It also extends shelf life, a practical concern for a community that often faced uncertainty. You take another step closer and realise Rivka's workspace is more than a bakery, it's a sacred zone. She mutters a short blessing over the batch. Her fingers work rhythmically, shaping, rolling, knotting. She doesn't measure, she knows the dough by feel. She works by memory, not recipe. And it's not just about food. These, she says, are for Shabbat. You don't eat them with butter, you eat them with meaning. The bagel isn't the centerpiece of the table, that's the challah, but it's there quiet and round, a faithful companion to the Sabbath meal. It's convenient, yes, but it's also symbolic. No beginning, no end. A reminder of cycles of continuity, of God's presence in all things, even breakfast. You're handed a still warm bagel, and instinctively you hold it with both hands. It feels solid, intentional, like a tiny wheel of tradition. Rivka eyes you as you take a bite. Don't rush, let the chew teach you something. You nod, chewing thoughtfully. There's salt, sure, a hint of smoke, but there's also something you can't quite name, some kind of gravity in the taste, as if centuries of hands had pressed themselves into the dough before it ever reached your mouth. She sees it in your face. We've been doing this a long time, she says. We know how to make bread, remember. Behind her shelves are stacked with braided challah rings of a boiseneck and knotted rolls. Each shape has its moment. Each moment has its shape. You linger in the bakery as more neighbours stop in. An elderly man picking up 6 bagels just in case. A girl with a cloth pouch and a single coin. A boy sent by his grandmother with a message and a wink. Rivka knows them all by name. She remembers who likes sesame, who prefers plain, who needs soft ones because of bad teeth. And somewhere between the heat of the oven and the rhythm of the rolling, you start to understand. This isn't just baking, it's caretaking. The guild might enforce the rules, but here in Kazimierz, the baker is part priest, part neighbour, part historian. Every bagel is a blessing, every crust is a comfort. Later, as you leave the shop and the cold air hits your face again, you tuck your fresh bagel inside your cloak, like a treasure. The city is louder now, busier. Bells ring from the church towers and carts rattle down the cobbled streets. But somehow, the centre of everything feels quieter. Still, it's round and still warm in your pocket. You wander back toward the main square bagel in hand and steam in your scarf thinking about what you've just seen. Boiled bread, sacred rituals, a bakery that feels more like a confessional. It's strange to realise something as simple as a bread ring could carry so much weight. But this is the Middle Ages after all. Here nothing is just what it seems, not even breakfast. The closer you get to the Guildhall, the more official things begin to look. You pass a wooden placard, weathered, carved with a sheaf of wheat, and a stylised bagel looped in the middle. Below that, in careful Latin script, the words Collegium Pistores Oboiseneck, the Guild of Bagel Bakers. Yes, a real thing. Inside it smells like dried ink, damp parchment, and a faint undercurrent of garlic. 2 men argue softly in a back corner about flour shipments. Another is meticulously sharpening a set of dough knives, polished bone handles notched to mark years of service. And behind a heavy desk sits the guildmaster, draped in a robe that was once probably black, but now mostly flower grey. He peers over his spectacles. You've been in Rivka's shop. You nod. She works outside the guild. He raises an eyebrow as though this might be a scandal. But then he smiles faintly, still makes a good crust. That's the thing about guilds in Krakow. They were strict, yes, but they weren't always cutthroat. In theory, they were about quality control, protecting artisans, ensuring stable prices. In reality, they were also about paperwork politics and a good dose of ego. You glance at the guild scrolls, rosters of names, diagrams of kneading techniques, lists of fines. Some bakers were penalised for using inferior barley, others for misrepresenting bake times. There's even a line about overboiling to deceitful chewiness. You stifle a chuckle. Then there's the guild's holy grail, the secret recipe. Supposedly, the original bagel formula is kept locked in a sealed chest behind the guildmaster's chair, inscribed on calfskin and written in code. No one's seen it in decades, probably because it's less of a recipe and more a list of vague wisdom. Measure with the eyes. Listen for the dough's sigh, boil until it remembers the river. Historians still argue whether this recipe ever existed, or if it was a bit of baker's theatre, something to give the guild an air of mystique and discourage rogue loaves from rising outside official ovens. Either way, the myth persists. Every apprentice hopes to one day see it, or at least hear about it from someone who heard about it from someone else, who might have once scrubbed the chest it supposedly lives in. You're handed a copy of the guild rules. They're stricter than you expect. To join, you must prove your skill in boiling, baking, shaping, and scoring. You must recite the laws of flour, know which woods to burn and which to avoid. You must pay dues, swear loyalty, and yes, promise never to reveal the recipe, whether real or imagined. One clause stands out: let no man twist the ring who has not turned the flame, nor weighed the dough, nor stood through dawn with ash upon his sleeve. Basically, you have to earn it, no shortcuts. You wander out of the hall and into a courtyard where a group of apprentices kneel beside a long work table. A master baker is teaching them the twist and seal, how to loop the dough into a ring and fuse the ends just right. Too loose and it falls apart in boiling. Too tight and it bakes unevenly. It's an art form, and every failed bagel gets a good-natured groan from the crowd. One boy manages a nearly perfect loop, and his master claps him on the back. Not bad for someone with fingers like turnips. They laugh, flour flies. Watching them, you realise this isn't just about bread. It's about belonging. Mastery. Shared knowledge passed from one generation of sticky, sleep-deprived hands to the next. You catch a glimpse of an old seal used by the guild circular, of course, with a crowned bagel in the centre, flanked by 2 poppy seed branches. It's been pressed into wax, stamped onto scrolls, maybe even painted above doorways, to show that here within these walls, the dough is sacred. A few of the apprentices take a break and sit near a fire chewing on yesterday's batch. One of them notices your half-eaten bagel and asks Rivka's. You nod again. She taught me everything I know, he says, not looking the least bit guilty. So much for guild rivalry. The fire crackles. Someone starts telling a story about a baker who tried to use duck eggs instead of water. The resulting bagels puffed up, exploded in the oven, and coated the ceiling in flour glue for weeks. Historians never write about that, the storyteller grins, but we remember. The others nod. That's the quiet magic of this guild. Beneath all the rules and formality, it's really about memory. Food memory. Craft memory. The kind you can only pass by doing. By shaping dough until your wrists ache, and your fingers know more than your brain. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the baker's hall, 500 years from now, may be replaced by a bakery chain, may be lost entirely. But someone somewhere will still be making boiled bread, still shaping circles, still passing on the twist, the boil, the bake. And maybe, just maybe, someone will still be arguing about the right chew. You head out of the guild hall, your brain buzzing like a kettle just about to boil. All this talk of dough and duty has left you with one burning question: why boil the bagel at all? Most breads go straight into the oven. Maybe a rest, maybe a glaze, maybe a sprinkle of seeds, but a full-blown dunk in hot water. That's not standard. That's weird. So naturally, you're off to investigate. You follow your nose again, and the faint sound of bubbling, until you find yourself in a sunken courtyard behind a bakery. The air is thick with steam and smoke. You peer into the gloom and see the source a squat cauldron set over a brick fire pit, belching clouds of heat and the rich nutty aroma of wet flour. Nearby, a baker stands with a long-handled slotted paddle, lowering rings of raw dough into the water with the care of a jeweller setting gemstones. The water roils, the bagels bob. You introduce yourself. He grunts a greeting and hands you a dough ring to hold. It's soft, warm, slightly sticky, alive almost. Then, without fanfare, he drops one into the pot. Boiling, he says, makes the skin. You wait. After about 30 seconds, he scoops it out. The dough looks exactly the same, only now it's glistening slightly, puffed and firm enough to handle without deforming. Now it will bake without splitting, keeps the shape, seals the crumb. He lays it on a wooden tray. Each bagel has a sheen to it, almost like shellac. You reach out and press one gently. It springs back. Without boiling, the baker says, you get bread. With boiling, you get bagel. You nod slowly, chewing on this, figuratively for now. Historians still argue where this technique began. Some trace it back to the Roman buccellatum, a ring-shaped bread, sometimes parboiled for durability. Others suggest it may have evolved from pretzel making in the Germanic world, where lye-dipped dough was used for ceremonial breads. Still others point to Jewish dietary laws and Sabbath prep traditions as inspiration, boil to seal, in moisture bake to finish, and voila bread you could make in advance that still felt fresh. One thing's clear, the method worked. And in medieval Poland, where ovens were temperamental water, didn't just help it protected. Boiling ensured a uniform crust and kept the bread from drying out too fast. It also made it more portable, which is crucial when your customer might be walking 3 villages away to break their fast. You watch another batch go in steam, curling around your face. The baker works in silence, his motions practiced, almost meditative. He knows just how long to hold each ring, when to flip it, when to rescue it from the boiling depths. You ask about the water. Barley water sometimes, he says, salted, sometimes honey or malt. That's another secret weapon. The boiling liquid isn't just plain water, it's seasoned, sweetened. It can change the flavour, the colour, even the gloss of the final bake. Honey lends golden tones. Salt keeps things savoury. Some bakers even drop in herbs or onion skins, not for taste, but for colour. And then there's superstition. One woman, he says, she sings while she boils. Same tune every batch. Says it keeps the rings from cracking. You raise an eyebrow. She's not wrong, he adds, straight-faced. They never crack. You let that one sit. It's hard not to feel a certain reverence watching the process. The dough begins as something fragile, limp. Then in just a minute of boiling, it becomes something else. Resilient, structured, ready. It's not unlike people you think. A little heat, a little pressure, and suddenly you're strong enough to face the fire. As the bagels dry slightly, on wooden boards, the baker brushes them with brine and sprinkles poppy seeds with his thumb. 1, 2, 3. Then into the oven they go. Heat from brick and wood and thyme. The room warms with it. The crust darkens. The scent turns sweet and rich like toasting grain and campfire smoke. You realise suddenly how much patience this takes. It's a dance. Dough rests, then boils, then bakes. Each step precise, each moment crucial, and each baker a conductor of this quiet orchestra of flour and fire. You sit on an overturned basket and munch your still warm bagel, watching the next batch go in. Somewhere behind you a cat yowls, a pot clangs, a woman scolds a child for stealing the soft ones. You smile. It's the soundscape of a world held together by bread. The baker finally breaks his silence again. People think we make food, we don't. You tilt your head. We make time, he says. Chewy time. You eat it slow, it stays with you. You nod. It's true. And suddenly the boiling doesn't seem so strange after all. It seems like part of a philosophy. That nothing worth eating or remembering comes without a pause. A dunk. A moment of change. Your bagel's down to the last chewy bite. And honestly, you're starting to believe that a bit of boiling might be good for the soul too. By now your fingers are sticky with flour dust and faintly salty from the crust of 3 different bagels. Yes, you've had another, maybe 2. They're hard to resist and each one tastes like a slightly different lesson. One softer, one crispier one, with a hint of something floral you can't quite place. But now it's time to explore something quieter, gentler, the way bagels made their way into the rhythm of sacred life. You're in the Jewish quarter again, just as the sun begins to dip behind the tiled roofs, casting Casimirs in honey-coloured light. The streets soften. The shouting merchants, the gossiping apprentices, even the street dogs seem to lower their voices. It's almost Sabbath, and you can feel it in the hush that settles over the cobbles like a blanket. You follow a young boy carrying a basket, peeking under the cloth for a quick sniff before racing around a corner. The scent trails behind him, fresh bagels. You turn that same corner and find yourself in front of a family home, where preparations for Friday evening are underway. Candles are being polished. A brass goblet rests beside a loaf of challah, its braided crust shiny with egg wash. And off to the side, covered with a linen cloth, a small stack of obwazanek waits patiently on a wooden board. They're not the centrepiece, not tonight, but they're present, faithfully like cousins invited to every family gathering, even if no one quite remembers who they're related to. An elder named Yosef waves you inside with a kind smile. He's not a baker, but he's a connoisseur. I judge bagels, he says, completely serious, every week. You sit beside him on a low stool while his granddaughter prepares the table. The air smells of onions, roast chicken and waxed wood. Bagels, Yosef says, are not for show. They are for memory, for habit, for hand-to-mouth moments you don't even notice until they're gone. You ask when they're eaten, with what, how. He shrugs. Before prayers, after prayers, at weddings, funerals, festivals, when you are too hungry to wait for the meal, when your teeth are sore but your pride is intact. He picks one up, turns it in his hand, a circle, like the week, like a promise. Historians still argue how closely the bagel was tied to Sabbath rituals in medieval Poland. Some say it was just a convenience, an easily stored, quickly warmed bread for families too busy preparing the main meal. Others insist it was more intentional, a quiet nod to the eternal, to the divine cycles of rest and renewal. One thing's certain, bagels were always there, in the background, comforting, familiar, a kind of edible punctuation mark between the formalities of faith and the informal chatter of daily life. You watch as the family gathers. Blessings are murmured, a match strikes, the candles glow, and the bread is broken, or in this case sliced with a small knife, and offered one ring per hand. The bagel here is simple, plain. No seeds, no glaze. It's soft from being wrapped in linen for hours, but the chew is still there. You bite in quietly. It doesn't try to impress, it just is. Later you ask about weddings. Oh yes, Yosef says, bagels at weddings, always. He tells you how in some traditions the bride and groom were given bagels tied together with ribbon. 2 loops, 2 lives, 1 knot. And funerals. He nods again more slowly. Sometimes, for mourners, something easy to eat, something not sweet, something round. You sit in silence for a moment, absorbing it. The bagel as celebration, as sustenance, as comfort, as metaphor. There's even a belief, he says, that eating a bagel while walking backwards on the 3rd day of a festival could bring good dreams. Does it work, you ask? Yosef shrugs, only if you believe in dreams. Outside, the wind picks up. A child runs past the open door, giggling her mouth full, a half-eaten bagel looped around her wrist like a bracelet. You thank Yosef and step back into the cobbled lane. The evening smells sweeter now, as if the city itself is exhaling. You walk slowly, rounding another corner, and pass a young man singing softly as he cleans his shop. His voice is low and steady, and the words you don't understand carry the shape of something ancient, something that loops back on itself, like a dough ring rising in warm air. There's peace in this repetition, in these small chewy customs, and though you're not sure you'd make it as a baker, you do start to think you might understand the rhythm of this life. Not dramatic, not loud, but steady, reliable, circular. Like the Sabbath, like the week, like the ring in your pocket still warm from Yosef's hearth. Section 8. The sun has fully set now, and lanterns are beginning to flicker to life around Krakow's central square. Their glow bounces softly off rain-washed stones and glints against brass door fixtures and wagon wheels coated in dust. You stroll slowly, your bagel wrapped in cloth and tucked under your arm like a loaf-shaped talisman. There's one more layer to this story. You're curious about something a little more political, a little more royal. Because as it turns out, bagels weren't just a household staple or a baker's pride. They were also, believe it or not, a matter of state. Your footsteps echo through the corridor of a small building near the castle walls, where royal records are kept. A clerk greets you, pale ink stains on his fingers, spectacles perched perilously on the tip of his nose. Ah, he says, squinting, you're here about the boiled bread. You smile. Word gets around. He ushers you into a narrow chamber, lined with scrolls, ledgers, and wax seals. The scent is pure Middle Ages, beeswax, musty parchment, and something faintly medicinal. He pulls out a brittle document and lays it reverently on the table. This, he says, is the royal privilege. He points to a passage written in elegant Latin, flowing and spidery. You can't read it, but he translates as you listen. By order of the Crown, the Jewish community of Krakow is hereby granted the right to produce, sell, and regulate the making of obłazanek, being the round bread of boiling and baking. In short, bagel rights. Yes, you heard that right. In medieval Poland, royal charters were sometimes issued granting specific baking privileges, often to Jewish communities, as part of a larger strategy of diplomacy and containment. These weren't just permissions, they were protections. They allowed communities to self-regulate, to operate legally to survive. Bagels became a kind of edible agreement between the throne and its subjects. You imagine the king seated on his carved oak chair, pen in hand, deciding that, yes, this group of bakers could legally boil their bread into chewy halos without fear of punishment or interference. And in return, order, structure, revenue. Historians still debate how widespread these privileges were, and whether they were offered with genuine tolerance or political convenience. Some say it was about economic incentive. Others argue it was part of the Crown's broader strategy to integrate and monitor Jewish populations. Whatever the motive, it created space, a sanctioned corner of cultural and culinary identity. The bagel, humble as it was, became a symbol not just of faith but of recognition. The clerk rolls up the parchment and tucks it into its protective sleeve. You'll notice he says that the privilege includes the right to inspect competitors. You raise your eyebrows. That's right, he nods. A licensed bagel baker could technically fine or report someone selling unauthorized bread rings. You try to imagine a medieval sting operation on illegal bagels. He shrugs. The stakes were high. Bread was power. That sticks with you as you exit the chamber and step out into the square again. Bread was power, and when boiled bread was tied to royal privilege, it wasn't just a meal, it was policy. You think about Rivka, her sleeves dusted in flour, Yosef turning his bagel in a circle before slicing it, the apprentices practicing their twist, all of it echoing down from a parchment sealed with wax and approved by a king. And that approval wasn't just symbolic. It often came with real protections against arbitrary taxation, forced relocations, or worse. In a world where Jewish communities frequently faced expulsion or persecution, a royal document could mean the difference between continuity and erasure. You pass a baker's stall near the guild house, now closing for the night. The vendor offers you a late batch, warm and slightly misshapen. The end of the day ones are the best, she says. They've had time to think. You take it amused. The bagel is a little softer, a little less structured than its earlier siblings, but no less comforting. You nibble as you walk, and the square glows gold with torchlight. A street performer juggles 3 apples. A soldier leans on a spear, gnawing something doughy. A group of students pass by, chanting Latin rhymes and laughing at their own brilliance. You pause at the edge of the square where the stone begins to give way to earth. A carving near the archway shows a king holding a loaf. Beside him, a woman with a ring of bread in her hand, raised like an offering. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe not. Because that's the magic of medieval history. It leaves space for guessing, for filling in the cracks with human moments, for believing even just a little that something as small as a bagel could carry the weight of law, faith and comfort across centuries. The parchment is sealed, the ovens are cooling, but the story, still warm. The night deepens over Krakow. Lanterns flicker low and the last of the market stalls have shuttered. Even the bagel bakers have gone quiet ovens, cooling flour swept into neat little piles, and apprentice hands soaking in basins of warm water. But your mind is still spinning, still circling, just like the subject of tonight's wanderings. Because it turns out bagels weren't just sacred or sanctioned, they were oddly enough fancy. You first catch wind of it in a side alley where 2 women are arguing about a wedding. One of them is holding a tray. The tray holds bagels, not plain ones either. These are decorated with ribbons tucked into folded cloth and gently steaming in the cool air. "Don't you bring the groom's mother bagels with poppy seed again," the first woman hisses. She hates them, always has. She never says so. She says with her eyes, You edge around them trying not to laugh, but your curiosity is piqued. Bagels as gifts. You find answers in a nearby home where the family's preparing for a wedding tomorrow. You're ushered in. People here are used to extra hands, even if yours are cold and useless. The kitchen is chaos in the way only pre-wedding kitchens can be. Steam fogs. The air pots rattle someone's yelling about a missing spoon. And near the window, a young woman sits stringing bagels onto a cord like beads. These are for the guests, she says, holding one up. It's smaller than the ones you've seen at market, more delicate, almost ornamental. They take one as they leave. It means they go with blessing and food. You ask if this is a local tradition. Old as anything, she shrugs. Before my grandmother, even. Turns out in some communities, bagels played a role in life cycle events, especially weddings. They were tokens of goodwill, symbols of prosperity, round like the cycle of marriage, dense like the hope that it would endure, and cheap enough that you could feed many without bankrupting yourself. One story goes that brides were given a ribbon of bagels as part of their dowry gifts, looped over the arm like a crown of chewy pearls. Another tradition had the bride's father offering bagels to the groom's family, a kind of edible peace treaty. Take this ring, it whispered, and try not to start a blood feud. Historians still argue how widespread these customs were. Were they rooted in Jewish tradition, Slavic folklore, or simply clever hospitality? Did every town in medieval Poland string rings of dough for newlyweds, or was it just Krakow being Krakow? Like so many food customs, it's hard to pin down. What matters is that it meant something, even when it looked silly, even when it was just one chewy bite in a very long day of celebrating. Later someone hands you one of the ceremonial bagels. It's got caraway seeds, slightly sweet, still warm. They don't last long, the woman says. The ribbon gets eaten first. You raise an eyebrow. By children and drunk uncles. Naturally. But weddings weren't the only places where bagels stood in for sentiment. You hear whispers of other customs. Bagels tucked into baskets for new mothers, sent to families mourning a death, handed out at religious festivals strung on sticks or looped around wrists. There's a bagel for every season, it seems, every feeling. You make your way back toward the square, past a quiet fountain and the last of the wandering chickens. And you remember a story someone told earlier in the guild hall about a nobleman who received a basket of bagels from a baker's daughter and took it as a romantic proposal. Why else would you give someone 12 perfect circles? The guildmaster had said, eyes twinkling. That's not bread, that's a message. You're not sure if he was serious, but the image lingers. A bagel as flirtation, a bagel as blessing, a bagel as a way of saying I see you and I wish you warmth and also carbs. Back in the guild courtyard, someone has carved a small heart into the stone wall. Inside it, a tiny, perfect ring. Coincidence? Maybe. But you're starting to think Krakow has always been a little obsessed with circles. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. In a world of war plague, unpredictable weather, and royal taxes, something dependable, like a chewy boiled loop of dough, might be the most reassuring gift of all. Because in the end, that's what the bagel is, a gesture. One you can eat. One that lasts just long enough to remind you that someone cared enough to shape it. Boil it, bake it, and maybe if you're lucky, tie it up with ribbon and pass it your way. You tuck the wedding bagel into your pocket. Another ring for the road. The scent of roasted garlic and chimney smoke drifts through Krakow as you make your way back toward the market square. You've walked through traditions, through rituals, through flower-dusted guild halls and wedding kitchens. But as you glance around at the quiet stalls and closed shutters, a new question rises. What happens when there's not enough bread to go around? Because Krakow, for all its warmth and chewy generosity, is still a medieval city. And medieval cities know hardship. Grain spoils, harvests fail, war blocks the trade routes. And when there's not enough flour, people notice fast. You pass the edge of a square where a notice board has been nailed to a wooden post. The ink is smudged, but the meaning is clear restrictions on flour use, price ceilings, warnings about hoarding, and in smaller script something about maintaining order, among sellers of bread rings. You read that again. Even in famine, bagels are getting official attention. A nearby baker sweeping the front of her shop sees you reading and snorts. Flour fights, she says, every decade or so. We run out and suddenly everyone wants to boil stones. You ask what she means. She straightens up and points toward a shuttered stall. That one used to sell black bread. Rye mostly, nothing fancy. But when the grain ran dry in '68, she tried to pass off barley mash and onion skin rings as bagels. Said they were festive variants, she chuckles. Guild fined her so hard her oven went cold for months. Turns out the bagel's popularity was a double-edged sword. When times got tough, it was the first thing everyone tried to fake. Not just because it was beloved, but because it was portable, sellable, and in a hungry city, always in demand. Historians still argue about how Krakow managed food shortages. Some say the guilds protected the people by regulating bread fairly and punishing price gougers. Others argue the guilds protected themselves first, and that bagel access was sometimes limited to those who could afford guild-approved prices. What's certain is that the bagel became a kind of flashpoint. Too expensive and people rioted. Too many counterfeits and the guild cracked down. Too much demand and flour vanished overnight. There are stories, half legend, half truth, of bagel riots during bad harvest years. Angry customers pelting fake bakers with their own rings. Bread confiscated by city guards. Bakers accused of adding chalk to stretch their flour. A city where even the smell of toasting bread could start a brawl. You follow the sound of low voices and find yourself near a fire where a few elderly townsfolk sit sharing memories over roasted turnips and thick stew. One of them, a wiry man with papery hands, leans toward you. During the famine, the bagel saved us, he says. You raise an eyebrow. Not the bread, he clarifies, the rule. He explains how the guild stepped in during a harsh winter decades ago. Flour was scarce, but rather than hoarding the bagel, bakers reduced their batch sizes and created ration lines. You could only buy one bagel per family per day, and the guild shockingly enforced it. It worked, he shrugs. People waited. They got less, but they got it. And maybe that's the real story. Because the bagel wasn't just food, it was order. It was a shared agreement that everyone deserved a bite, even in crisis. Especially in crisis. You walk past a shop where a faded wooden carving shows a bagel in flames. You ask someone about it, and they nod solemnly. Fire of 1402, they say, burned half the street. Bakers lost everything. But by the next Sabbath, the first thing they made before walls were even rebuilt was a ring of dough, just one, for the shrine. Symbol over structure, circle over rubble. Later, you find a crumbling wall with etchings too worn to read. But someone's wedged a bagel into a crack new still warm. A quiet offering. Maybe superstition. Maybe habit. Maybe hope. You sit on the edge of the square and take out your own bagel. The one from earlier. The wedding ring. It's gone a bit stiff, but you bite in anyway. There's chew. There's salt. And there's something else, something that tastes like memory. Because in the end the bagel survived not because it was fancy or royal or sacred. It survived because people needed it, because it was round and shareable and could be made with very little. And because in the worst of times, even one ring of bread could make the world feel a little less broken. Morning again, and with it the scent of ashes, onions and naturally bread. But today feels different. Not because of what's being baked, but who's doing the baking. You find yourself walking toward a quieter part of Krakow, past garden plots, and hens scratching under wooden fences. This is the neighbourhood of tradespeople, spinners, brewers, soap makers, and tucked between two narrow homes, a bakery run entirely by women. You're invited in by a woman named Malgorzata, her sleeves rolled high, and her voice hoarse from calling orders at her apprentices. Inside the heat clings like a damp blanket, but the dough smells are divine, tangy, salty, yeasty. Malgorzata laughs when you tell her you've come to learn about bagels. Then you've come to the wrong place, she says, grinning. We make better than bagels. She's joking, mostly, because in truth women have been behind bagels all along. Guilds were male-dominated, sure, They held the legal charters collected. The Jews policed the weights and measures. But home kitchens, Sabbath loaves, festival rings. That was often women's work, quiet, unpaid, and fiercely protected. Malgorzata shows you her shaping board, 3 generations of notches carved into its edge, one for each daughter who learned the twist. Her grandmother taught her the 5-finger fold. Her mother added steam to the oven floor for extra chew. She herself swears by goat milk in the winter dough. There's a rhythm to it, she says, kneading without looking. If you break it, the dough sulks. You're handed a small piece and told to try. It sticks to your thumbs, folds unevenly, ends up more of a dough knot than a ring. She nods anyway. We all start with knots. Historians still argue how much credit women should get for culinary innovations like bagels. Their work rarely made it into guild ledgers or royal charters. But recipe collections, often handwritten in kitchens, pass down with stains, and side notes tell a different story. They show names, edits, tweaks, evidence of a long, quiet mastery. And maybe it wasn't about getting credit. Maybe it was about feeding people, about keeping something warm on the table, something round, something dependable. You watch as Malgorzata's daughter presses her thumb into the centre of a raw bagel to widen the hole. Otherwise, she says, they close in the oven. They forget to breathe. It's a good metaphor. You write it down mentally. Later, as trays cool near the window, the family gathers around a bowl of stewed cabbage and soft rolls. You're offered one, and as you chew, the elder daughter tells you about a custom in their family. Every time a child is born, they bake a tiny bagel just for them. No salt, no topping, just flour, water, yeast and love. It's not for eating, she says. It's hung above the cradle, then dried, kept in the family jar. You ask if they ever look inside the jar. Only when we need a name, she says, or a reminder. The bagels in the jar are tiny fossilized halos, time loops, anchors. You leave the house quietly, the kind of quiet reserved for moments that feel sacred in ways you don't want to over-explain. Outside the chickens are louder, the breeze cooler, but the warmth in your chest lingers. You pass a boy on a cart chewing a ring of bread, a woman buying flour, a dog trying very hard to pretend it hasn't just stolen someone's breakfast. And you think about how many of these simple, doughy rings began in women's hands. How many customs were preserved because someone's mother refused to let the water boil too long? How many memories were braided into everyday bread? Guilds had the scrolls, kings had the seals. But women, they had the ovens. And those ovens have been whispering their secrets for centuries. You've now seen the bagel as blessing, as sustenance, as symbol. But today, you stumble upon something stranger, something a little less sacred, and a lot more dramatic. You're standing in a square near Krakow's defensive wall when you hear a loud voice shout, "I demand justice for this rubber ring." Naturally, you turn. It's a man red-faced holding what appears to be a very overcooked bagel. Behind him stands a sheepish young vendor, arms crossed, defending his oven, like a knight before a drawbridge. A small crowd has gathered. Some laugh, some nod solemnly. One woman tuts and mutters he boiled it too long again. Welcome to the glorious world of medieval bagel disputes. The argument escalates. The vendor insists his oven is sound, his water pure, his flour weighed with care. The man insists the bagel is inedible. A witness steps forward, probably the vendor's cousin, and swears the batch was excellent just hours earlier. And then, just as you think it might come to blows, someone brings out the scale. Yes, a literal wooden scale, counterweights and all. Because in Krakow, in the 15th century, bread disputes were serious business, especially when it came to guild-regulated foods like the obwazenek. If a baker sold underweight or poorly made bread, they could be fine-shamed, even temporarily banned from market stalls. There were official testers, bread weighers, whose entire job was to monitor this sort of thing. They were like food inspectors, but with better cloaks, and presumably a deep distrust of flaky crusts. Historians still debate how often these punishments were enforced. Were they rare and ceremonial, or regular occurrences in cities obsessed with order and food fairness? Some say they happened monthly, Others believe they were mostly symbolic tools for discouraging dishonesty rather than punishing it. What's known for sure is that when they happened, people noticed. Some punishments were mild, a fine, a warning, the confiscation of a batch. Others were theatrical public shaming, bread thrown to the birds, or forced confessions written on chalkboards and hung around the baker's neck. One tale, likely apocryphal but beloved, tells of a baker who tried to pass off hollow bagels filled with crushed turnip paste. He was caught and made to walk a full lap around the market with a fake bagel crown on his head. You ask the onlookers if such things still happen. Oh, not the crown, someone says, waving dismissively, but the fine's still very real. The verdict is in the vendor's bagel, while ugly is technically passable. The man grumbles, accepts a replacement, and the crowd disperses. You can't help but smile, all this over a ring of flour and water. But that's the thing, because it's not just flour and water. It's pride, reputation, memory. You duck into a nearby bakery to warm your hands and are greeted by an old man with a crooked hat and a perfect round bagel resting on his scale. Mine never get rejected, he says, puffing out his chest. You believe him. He shows you his bagel stamp, a small wooden circle he presses into the dough before boiling. It's not required, but it's his mark, his signature. I've been baking for 40 years, he says. I've made mistakes, but I never lied to a bagel. You nod. He nods back approvingly. Then he leans closer. But don't trust the guy on Grodska Street. His sesame seeds are stale. The world of bagels, it seems, is full of rivalries. You leave the shop with another warm ring in hand, the crust shiny, the centre perfectly chewy. As you bite in, you realise this isn't just food. It's a contract, an unspoken promise between maker and eater. I will bake it well, and you will treat it with respect. And if you don't, well, there's always the crown of shame. The square's quiet again. The scales are tucked away, but the memory lingers of people who take their baking seriously, of a city that defends the dignity of dough, and of a ring that somehow manages to unite king's guildmasters, grandmothers, and the occasional angry customer. Because when your whole city agrees that a slightly overboiled bagel is worth arguing about, you're doing something right. A slow snow begins to fall as you make your way along the outskirts of Krakow. The flakes cling to cloaks and eyebrows, softening the rooftops and turning every chimney plume into a ribbon of steam. The city feels hushed, blanketed, insulated, as if even the ovens have lowered their voices to a whisper. It's the perfect weather for stories, and you're here for one more. You've heard about a village not far from the city where people speak of the bagel saint. Yes, a saint of bagels. You're sceptical, understandably, but curiosity and cold toes lead you to a small cottage where a woman named Aniela tends a hearth with one hand and stirs soup with the other. Her home smells of beets, wood smoke, and something faintly sweet and nutty. A linen-covered tray by the fire holds, of course, 6 fresh bagels. You ask about the saint. She laughs gently and nods. Ah, yes, old story. You want tea first. You sit. The tea is spiced. The bagel is warm. And Aniela begins. It was said, she says, that long ago, during one of the bitterest winters Krakow ever faced, when the rivers froze so hard you could dance on them, there lived a young girl named Basia who worked in a bakery. She was an orphan taken in by an old baker who taught her the trade not out of kindness, but because her small hands were good for shaping dough. You picture her, flour-streaked, bundled in wool, kneeling beside the fire, at dawn looping dough with quiet precision. One night, a storm rolled in, Aniela continues. No deliveries came, no grain wagons. The town panicked, but Basia stayed in the bakery. She boiled what little dough they had. She baked it all into tiny rings and carried them 2 at a time through the blizzard, leaving them on doorsteps, silent, unseen. By the morning the worst had passed, and everywhere people woke to find food, warm, round, miraculous. No one knew who had done it, until one man saw her scarf caught in a fence post and followed the tracks back to the bakery. Aniela pauses to sip her tea. They say she didn't ask for thanks, only that people pass it on. Historians, of course, would scoff. There's no record of a Saint Bagel, no church-sanctioned canonization, no miraculous relic. But in this village her story is told every winter. Children leave tiny bagels out on windowsills during the first snow. Some carve her symbol, a looping circle, with a flame inside into their oven doors. Aniela pulls aside a cloth on the mantel. There it is, the carved sign, weathered and faint, but unmistakably there. You ask if anyone still follows the tradition. Oh yes, she says, especially the bakers. Every apprentice learns the story. Some say it's silly. Others wear a loop of twine under their aprons for luck. And it's not just sentimental. You hear other stories, half-truths maybe, but consistent. A baker who gave away all her bread during a flood and saw her shop saved when the waters rose. A boy who delivered rings of dough during an outbreak and never got sick. A woman who found a lost child by following a trail of bagel crumbs. Coincidence, probably. But this is a city built on coincidence, on ritual, on the idea that the mundane can carry meaning if you let it. You thank Aniela and step back outside. The snow is deeper now. The lanterns glow softer. And in your pocket, a tiny bagel, no salt, no glaze, just flour water and a story. You pass a child, etching a circle into the snow with a stick. His sister scolds him for drawing it upside down. You smile and keep walking. Back in Krakow, the bells toll softly. Somewhere an oven door opens. A loop of dough is lowered into boiling water, and the circle continues. Because sometimes what people need most isn't ceremony or spectacle. It's comfort, familiar shapes, warm bread, a story passed hand to hand like dough. And in that quiet passing, even myths begin to rise. As evening wraps Krakow in a velvet hush, the city shifts once more. The merchants are gone, their stalls packed up like folded stories. Guildsmen have retired behind thick doors. The apprentices sleep with flour on their fingertips. But the ovens somewhere out of sight still glow, because some bakers never stop. You decide to walk the long way back to your quarters, curiosity tugging at your sleeve. You've followed bagels from cradle to crown, from ritual to riot, from famine to fairy tale. But one final mystery remains. How far did this humble ring of bread truly travel? You stop at a small tavern where the hearth is still crackling, and a few travellers swap tales over wooden mugs. One of them, a man in a patched wool cloak, clearly from the south, mentions Lviv. Another chimes in from Prague, and a third, older and quieter, lifts his drink and says Vienna. You freeze, because that right there is the name you've been waiting for. Vienna, the city that modern legend often claims invented the bagel. According to one particularly persistent myth in the late 1600s, a Viennese baker created the bagel to honour King Jan Sobieski of Poland after he defended the city from Ottoman siege. The baker, so the story goes, crafted the bread in the shape of a stirrup bugle in German to symbolise the king's horsemanship. Is it true? Possibly not. The timeline's fuzzy, and historians still argue about whether the tale was romanticised after the fact. What is true is that the bagel shows up in Viennese records in the 17th century, and from there it begins to spread west. You listen as the travellers talk. One had a ring bread in Bavaria that sounds suspiciously familiar. Another swears there's a chewy round loaf in the Baltics, baked with fennel seeds, and worn on strings during festival parades. And suddenly the picture broadens. The bagel is no longer just a Polish treasure. It's a traveller, a smuggled secret. A shape so simple and satisfying that it refuses to stay in one place. Later, in the dusty back corner of the tavern, you spot a faded map. You trace the likely journey with your finger, from Krakow to Vienna, from Vienna to Paris, from Paris eventually to New York. Because yes, the bagel makes it to America. Not yet, not in your story's current timeline, but one day, soon. Jewish immigrants bring it with them, packed into memory and recipe. It ends up in bakeries in Brooklyn and Lower Manhattan, then on every street corner and brunch menu. And along the way, it changes. It becomes bigger, puffier. It gets cream cheese. It meets lox. It gets mass-produced, frozen, bagged and barcoded. It becomes popular. But tonight, in the 15th century, standing in a Krakow tavern with ash on your boots and a crust in your pocket, you're reminded that everything starts somewhere. With a dough loop, a boiling pot, a guild rule, a prayer. You step back into the night and look up. The stars have scattered wide across the Polish sky, and as your breath fogs in the cold, you can't help but marvel at how far a simple bread ring can travel through space, through time, through memory. Somewhere out there, a baker in a future you'll never meet is shaping a circle and whispering secrets to the dough, and somehow you're connected. Not by title, not by fame, but by chew. The wind has settled, and the snow has slowed to a fine mist like powdered sugar, shaken from the clouds. The lanterns flicker low. Krakow is quiet in that particular way only old cities know how to be, where silence feels sacred and time softens around the edges. You walk slowly now, not because you're tired, but because you don't want to leave this place just yet. And why would you? You've tasted a city's soul. You've watched dough become memory. You've traced circles with your eyes and hands and heart. And through it all, the bagel has been both anchor and compass, a ring of meaning in a world that doesn't always offer answers. You find yourself standing near a shrine again, one of the little roadside ones half sheltered from the wind, with a carved Madonna and a flickering votive behind smoky glass. Someone's left an offering. Not a coin, not a flower, but a bagel plain unglazed, set gently on the stone shelf like a prayer. You don't touch it. Instead, you close your eyes and listen. You hear the hiss of ovens cooling, the soft thump of flour sacks stacked just so, the creak of wooden spoons, the splash of water in copper pots, the murmur of a baker reciting a recipe from memory, not out of necessity, but out of love. And then, like a soft wind in your ear, the echo of every hand that's shaped dough before you. A grandmother in Kazimierz, a scribe turned baker in Vienna, a child stringing rings of bread like jewellery, a guild master muttering about sesame seed scarcity, a girl named Basia carrying warmth through snow. They're all here, all kneeling beside the dough, folding it into circles, handing it off to the next pair of hands, with no ceremony, but all the care in the world. This is the truth of the bagel. It's not flashy. It's not proud. It just returns again and again. Boiled. Baked. Beloved. You take your seat beneath the archway, near the warm stones, and bite into your final bagel of the day. The crust gives, the centre resists. It's perfect. And maybe you understand something you didn't before. That history isn't told in kings or wars or empires alone. Sometimes it's shaped by dough and fire and patient hands. Sometimes it's what people eat and share and hand down. Quietly, faithfully, chew by chew. So if you ever find yourself lost or tired or aching, remember this. You are not the first. You are part of a circle. You are always welcome at the table. The snow falls gentler now, drifting in slow loops past the rooftops. The square is silent. Even the bells seem to pause, holding their breath with the rest of the city. You sit still, the last of the bagel warm in your hands, the candle in the shrine guttering low. The scent of baked grain and cooling embers lingers in your scarf. There's peace here. Not the kind you shout about, not the kind you post or pin or frame, but the kind you feel in your bones when something is just enough. When history whispers instead of lectures. When a story ends not with a bang, but with a circle closed. Let your jaw rest now. Let your eyes soften. Let the loops of time wind down. Maybe somewhere a baker still boils dough at dawn. Maybe somewhere a child bites into a bagel and hears a story wrapped in its crust. And maybe, just maybe, your dreams tonight will smell faintly of flour and fire and warm stone. So wherever you are and whenever you're listening, close your eyes. Let the circle hold you. Let the story settle. And sleep.